Hello, my name is Rebecca Woods, and I am Mesa County Library's first artist in residence for 2021. So what I primarily do is I'm a mixed media artist. I am spending my residency making toys because I think that we all deserve to have a little bit of fun. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be making articulated paper dolls. Now, these are a very traditional toy. They date back hundreds of years. But the nice thing about them is that we can put our own spin on them. And if you're particularly clever, you can even figure out how to attach strings or attach rods and create puppets out of them. So these are a very simple activity, and the great thing about them is that they are both good for small children as well as adults, and they're something that you can do together as a whole family. So to introduce our supplies, we're going to need materials that we would normally use for working with any sort of paper material. So in the kit, you are going to be provided with parts to make your own doll. When they do come together, you will be able to create something that is essentially like this. We have two different forms with elbows and knees that are articulated, or just the legs and arms. So you will start with something like a head. And the other thing that you will find in your kit is a wide variety of collage materials. So collage is a process where you take bits and pieces of found materials and you cut them or tear them into shape, and you build up interesting layers with different colors and different textures, and you glue them down as you go. So you can decorate these dolls just by drawing or painting on them, but we're going to get the best results if we take the paper, and you can use all kinds. You can use doilies, you can use tissue paper. Here we've got pages from books. See what you can find around your own house that you could turn into a collage. So you're also going to need some scissors, and if you have something like a craft knife, these are very useful for this. They're not necessary, but if you do use them, make sure that you're very careful because these are very, very sharp. So the first thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to start with the head. So starting with the head is a good place to start because it allows us to figure out what sort of character we're making. And as human beings, we love eyes, so we tend to start with eyes. And a tip for being able to orient these well is to go ahead and make a line of separation right down the center, and then to create a cross going across the face. This is so that you can keep the eyes straight and the nose straight as well as the mouth. So that top line is where we're going to put our eyes, and the center line is where the nose and the mouth are going to go. Now, you don't have to do a face facing straight forward. What you can do is, if you think of a beach ball and you think of how the lines on a beach ball curve as the beach ball goes around, you can create those curved lines and you can create a face that's sort of looking to the side. And the same thing applies. We're going to place our nose on that line and our mouth, and on the top line we're going to place our eyes. So I have a face started here, and it's very simple. It doesn't have to be very complicated. I'm going to give it some eyebrows, and it doesn't have to be a human face. If you want to make a monster face, if you want to draw a dinosaur head, the sky is the limit. You can make whatever you want. And this is going to just be a very simple plan. You can get very ornate and spend a great deal of time. But what's important is that this is a pencil sketch. This isn't going to be the permanent version. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and paint some lines on with a fine ink brush. And that is going to give a more expressive line. And any kind of tool that you want to use for mark making, feel free to do so. This isn't the only way to do it. You are going to need pencils, you are going to need markers, you can even use paint. Just go ahead and work with it until you're happy with the results that you get. I'm going to go ahead and fill in the eyebrows. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to apply some paint with some paint markers. I'm going to go ahead and bring in the whites of the eyes. Going to bring some highlight into the nose. And I'm going to apply some lips to this. Now this is very simple because I don't want the face to overtake the rest of the image. I'm going to take a gray pen and just apply some shadows to help deepen the image, help give it some dimension. And there we go. That is a good starter. Now while the paint on there is drying, I'm actually going to apply some little dots for pupils. While that is drying, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this out of the way, and I'm going to start looking through the paper that I have. So here we have some beautiful copper-colored tissue paper. We have some old maps and some transparent vellum. We have some very interesting textures here. We have some red paper that's very textured and it's got a lot of speckles in it. These are your general household doilies. A good thing to do is if you go to your craft stores, you can also get seasonal materials. So this is a Halloween doily. And another thing that's very useful is origami paper. So this is just some very simple black and white origami paper. And I think that this is what I'm going to start with. Now, the first thing that I want to do is I want to create some hair for this doll. So I want to go with this striped pattern because it will help give the hair some dimension. And what I'm going to do, I'm just carefully going to draw around the shape that I want for that hair. And I'm going to grab my cutting mat right here. Now this is a self-healing mat. It's very similar to what you would find for quilting or in art stores all over. And it's just to make sure that you don't cut any big gouges into the table when you're doing this. You can also cut it out using scissors. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this, and from here it's a process of playing around and seeing what is going to work best. So I have the start of a haircut right there. But what I want to do is I want to start utilizing that shape that I started with to build in and further develop what I'm making. And personally, I like to line up the head on top so that I don't accidentally cut it. And remember to practice knife safety. I think this is a good start, but now I just want one little piece to curl over the face. And there we go. Now I need to start attaching these. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to hold it down with my fingers for now. And you can use any type of paper glue for this. It doesn't have to be a special kind of glue. Today I'm going to be using rice starch glue. I'm going to go ahead and open this. And you can apply this with a brush, or if you have white glue, if you have glue sticks, that will also work. So, first thing that I'm going to apply, and when I do this, I like to have some kind of scrap paper that I can do the gluing on, because I don't want to get the glue all over my nice cutting mat. So now I have 3 pieces set. You'll notice that this piece is glued to the back of the head. And we're going to go ahead and apply this last piece. Now, before I glue it on, I want to erase the pencil marks that I started with. And the face is at a dry enough point that I can erase the pencil marks there as well. Be careful not to smudge your glue while you're doing this. And I think if I put this down and have a look at it, yeah, I think I might move that one up and over a little bit. And this is the nice thing about having a glue that doesn't dry instantly. If you have a glue that dries instantly, you don't have the chance to make adjustments, and that can be very difficult. So now that I have that, I'm going to apply some glue to the forehead. And I'm going to go ahead and get this attached. And now that I have this head, I'm going to go ahead and adjust some of the points where they don't quite meet up the way that I wanted to. And this is one of the places where having a knife comes in very handy. And I'm going to cut that at a sharper angle as well. So now we have the start of a head. And I'm going to go ahead and apply glue to the back of this head and get this glued together. And as I said, it's very important to give yourself some backing material. A particularly strong material that is good for this is washi paper, which you can get at any craft store. It's also referred to as rice paper, and that's got really long fibers that help hold everything together and make it very strong. So I'm just going to press that down with the palm of my hand, and I'm going to let that dry for a little bit. I don't want to mess with it again until it's actually dry, and I'm going to cut it out and move on to the rest of it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take some of this red fabric. Well, it's paper right now, but it's about to be fabric. And I'm going to take one of these torsos, and I'm going to place the torso into the paper and sort of start sketching where I want it to be. Now, what I'm thinking is that I would like to make some kind of a dress. And that's one thing that is very fun to do with these kind of dolls, is to explore fashion and to create fashion ideas, or even just something beautiful that you can have that gives you joy. So now that I have sketched out what I want for that, I am going to go ahead and grab my knife, and I'm going to start cutting it out. Now, because these dolls are going to be jointed, it's helpful to remember that you're going to need to have places where you can connect those joints. And it's easy to make those holes using some kind of a hole punch or a thumbtack. If you have very sharp nails, you could use a sharp nail. I personally like to use an awl if I don't have one of my bookbinding punches with me. So this is a bookbinding punch. I find that these work very well. But the thicker you build your layers, the harder it is to punch through them in order to connect the joints. And all right, we have this piece, and let's see, just sort of test fit it, how this piece is going to look on this. So that's a good start. But I want to make some adjustments. I am thinking that I would like to have something a little bit more like a sweetheart neckline. Bring it down and adjust it. The nice thing about art is that you don't have to do it right the first time. You can make changes, you can adjust, and the whole thing can be a learning process. So now that's closer to what I had in mind. And I'm going to go ahead and cut out the other pieces that I have here as well. And the last one. What I'm thinking is that I have these cool doilies, and I have this textured black and white paper. And I also have these sheets from books. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to build up some interesting layering that way, as if the dress itself has some ruffles going on. So I'm going to grab one of the pieces of black, And I'm going to center it on where I want those ruffles to be. Doilies are wonderful for lace and for ruffles. And as a craft store addict, I am constantly looking for seasonal items that will be useful to me. Obviously, this is from Halloween. And I'm going to go ahead and slice that. And again, we're going to test fit it. There's a lot of test fitting that goes on. But there we go. I'm going to leave that right there for now. I'll come back to it in a second. So with this paper, I really like all the words that are on it. And what I think I'm going to do, I'm going to give myself a little sketch, is I'm going to cut out just some random shapes that I can turn into bits that look a bit more roughly. And I'm going to use this to ornament my skirt. You can just cut out random pieces. They don't have to be perfectly orderly. You can even tear them if you want. What I'm doing right now is I'm looking for a very clean edge, but tearing will give you a very organic edge. It will make it a little bit fuzzier. It'll be a little bit more like having a fuzzy sweater or a very fine, gauzy sort of fabric. All right. And now that I have some of these cut out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these layers and I'm going to play around with, I'm going to cut that in the middle. I'm going to play around with placing them in a curved fashion to create a visual ruffle. So I can see if I like it. There we go. Of course, the problem with collage is that once you start having a lot of little bits everywhere, they start going everywhere. That's fine, that's kind of part of the process. Okay, so how does that come in and apply these down at the bottom? So that's the start of the dress. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to stop for a second. I'm not going to glue the dress directly to the body because if I do that, I may not be able to get the legs on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to grab some of my legs, and I want these legs to be a bit decorated. Everything else is fancy, why shouldn't the legs be? So I'm going to pick a patterned piece of paper I find that this pattern kind of reminds me of the carpet in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, which will make for wonderful tights. So for this, I'm just going to trace around, and they're going to be going sort of every which way, and that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and cut these ones out with my scissors. And this one I'm going to be a little bit less careful on, because what I want is I want to have sort of this crazy eye-bending sort of pattern that is going to complement the very simple red of the dress. So I'm going to go ahead and get it glued on, and I will build this up as I go. Now, one of the important things about articulated paper dolls is that they do need to be assembled in steps. As I said before, if you just put the dress on, you're not going to be able to attach the legs without poking a hole through the top of the dress and ruining that effect that you've made for yourself. So I'm going to come in at a different angle. And I want to cut that there. I'm going to slide that into place. So now we have one leg. And nothing's sticking off there, so I don't need to give it any kind of a backing. I do have a little tiny piece that is sticking over the edge of the leg that I'm going to cut off. And I'm going to put that aside to let it dry. And on to the next leg. Right, so I have some matching leggings. Let's check on the head, see how the head is doing, and it feels like the head is dry enough to trim. Right, and there we go. We've got a head. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start to attach some of these parts. I'm going to give those a little bit longer to dry, but in the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to line the head up where it needs to be. And I think what I might do is take one of my very little brads right here, and those little brads are going to substitute the lips so you don't see a great big brad right in her neck. There's other things you can do as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and punch a hole. If you do not have a hole punch, you can just as easily line it up and poke it through, and that will work just as well. And go ahead and get that attached. And we're going to fold the tabs down on the back. So we now have a head attached to a body. And we're going to go ahead and do the same thing with the legs. And with the legs, I'm not worried about them being seen. They're going to be covered by a dress. But I do want them to be even. So I'm going to go ahead and take some of the brads that come with the kit, and I'm going to attach those as well. Now, when you glue it, you may have to flatten it out a bit. One thing that helps is if you have time, you can let it sit under a heavy book and flatten right out. But I am going to punch some holes for the arms, just so I know where they're going to be and I don't glue over them. And I'm going to start attaching the dress. So I can see there that I'm going to want to attach that arm first because it's going to be covered. So I'm just going to go ahead and stick this through and grab my arm. So you can glue pieces before you put them together, or you can glue afterwards. And I'm going to attach the arms first in this case. All right, and we are ready to start attaching this. So I'm going to glue the lace down to the back of the dress. And it's okay if the glue is a little bit messy on the back of the dress because you're going to be gluing it down to the doll anyway. So I'm going to get it positioned how I want. And again, I'm going to test fit it. And I am happy with how that looks. So I'm going to press it down a little bit to flatten it out and help with attaching. And from here, I'm going to go ahead and pull that off. I'm going to attach the other layers of the dress. Now remember to not put an enormous amount of glue. A little bit of glue will actually work. You don't have to make it completely soaked. And you will get better results with a thinner layer of glue. All right, and this is where we are so far. So I'm going to go ahead and glue the dress down, and it's very important when you glue down overlapping parts to not glue your material to the parts where you want it to continue to move. So in this case, I'm just going to glue in the middle of the torso. All right. And we are attached. Now when you make these, I do recommend that you press them under some heavy books overnight, just so that they don't start bending on you. And I'm going to go ahead and use some of this pretty copper tissue paper and give it a backing. I'm going to apply some jewelry. Just something very simple, something for the wrist. Now the tissue paper is very delicate, so you will need to have something backing it before you glue it down. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time getting it to stick. So when you use a stiffer piece of paper or a stiffer material to hold down a really delicate one, that's what's called stabilizing. And depending on the materials that you find, you may need to stabilize them in order to get them to stay where you want. Now there are more advanced techniques, and tissue paper is very good for that. You can use translucent tissue papers and stack them up on top of each other to create a beautiful watercolor effect. Or you can slightly dampen the tissue paper and very carefully fold and crinkle it to create very realistic paper-looking folds. But in my case, I'm going to stabilize it, and I'm going to glue it down as a piece of jewelry. But before I glue it, well, I'm going to apply the glue, and then I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut bands. The reason I have glued it first, and this works best if you have a water-soluble glue, is that it becomes very difficult to manage those individual pieces once you've got them cut. So I'm going to slide those into place. And personally, I find that tweezers are particularly effective for this. If you're working with very small pieces, it's very helpful to have tweezers to help you position them. But that will do for now. And I'm going to go ahead and finish her off by giving her some ballet flat looking shoes. So just going to do as I did before and trace around the outline of the feet. And I have left just a little bit of space right under where the heel would be that I'm going to apply some black ink to, just so that it looks like the shoe has a heel. And I'm going to go ahead and do the same on the other. You don't have to make them match if you don't want to. Your shoes don't have to match. Matching is entirely optional. We have that there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tear some strips of tissue paper. And what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to work in these folds and tear it off. You kind of have to hold it carefully while you do this. But this is a case of bunching it up and gluing it to create a more crinkled effect. You can also paint the edges of torn paper or color them with markers in order to give them a different effect as well. And let's get this positioned how I want it to be. Your fingers will get very sticky doing this, so make sure that you wash them afterwards. And if the stickiness bothers you, you can always wear gloves. And now we've got a lovely little bunch. And there we go. We have some lovely dimensional looking puffs on the ends of the shoes. So now I'm going to apply some glue to the back of those. All right. And there we go. We have created our own fashionable, articulated paper doll. Well, thank you so much for joining me in making this fun, easy project that allows you to create your own very cool little characters. So we went from a blank template to a character with a lot of personality. And I just want to emphasize that this project is wonderful as a group family activity. So kits are available at Mesa County Library for as long as supplies last. And I would be very glad to see what you make with this little figure.